The winter air in Aspen, Colorado, bit at the skin with a crisp edge. But inside the grand lodge of the winter's resort, warmth radiated from every corner. The chandeliers cast a golden glow over the ballroom, where the clink of champagne glasses mingled with laughter and the soft hum of a jazz quartet. The annual Winter Gala, hosted by the resort's owner, Caleb Winters, drew the elite from across the country: business moguls, socialites, and athletes who thrived on the thrill of Aspen's snowy slopes. The room buzzed with anticipation, but for Caleb, a 32-year-old white American with sharp blue eyes and a jawline that seemed carved from the mountains themselves, the night felt like another obligation in a life filled with them. Caleb stood near the bar, his tailored black suit accentuating his broad shoulders and lean frame. His pale skin contrasted with the dark fabric, and his neatly combed ash-blonde hair caught the light as he scanned the room. He was used to being watched. His wealth status as the owner of the most exclusive ski resort in Aspen, and his undeniable charm made him a focal point. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere. His rival Derek Holt had been circling like a vulture, snapping up smaller resorts and threatening to encroach on Caleb's territory. The pressure was mounting, and Caleb felt it in the tightness of his chest, a reminder of the stakes he carried. Across the room, Zoe Patel moved with a different kind of energy. A 29-year-old African-American woman was a striking figure with deep brown skin that glowed under the warm lights. Her coiled hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her emerald green dress hugged her athletic frame, a testament to her years as a competitive skier and now a sought-after instructor. Zoe's presence at the gala was a mix of chance and necessity. She'd been invited as a guest of one of her clients, a wealthy patron who insisted she attend. She wasn't here for the glitz, though. Zoe lived for the mountains, the rush of carving through fresh powder, and the quiet moments when the world seemed to pause under a starlit sky. Their paths crossed near the terrace doors, where the cold air seeped in, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Zoe had stepped away from the crowd, needing a moment to breathe. The gala, with its polished surfaces and performative smiles, felt suffocating. She leaned against the railing, her dark eyes fixed on the sky above, where stars glittered like scattered diamonds. Caleb, seeking escape from another conversation about market shares, noticed her standing alone. Something about her stillness drew him in a contrast to the frenetic energy of the room. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice low but warm, carrying the faintest hint of a Midwestern drawl. Zoe turned her gaze, assessing him in an instant. She recognized him. Everyone in Aspen knew Caleb Winters, but she wasn't one to be dazzled by wealth or status. "Only if you're not here to pitch me a timeshare," she said, a playful edge to her tone. Caleb chuckled, the sound loosening something in his chest. "No pitches, just needed a break from the circus in there." He gestured toward the ballroom, then leaned on the railing beside her, his pale hands gripping the cold metal. "You don't seem here for the champagne and small talk either." Zoe's lips curved into a small smile. She said, "I'm here for the stars," tilting her head toward the sky. "They're a better company than most of the people in there." He followed her gaze, and for a moment they stood in silence, the vastness of the night stretching above them. The stars seemed brighter out here, away from the glare of the chandeliers. Caleb felt a pull toward her, something he couldn't quite name. She wasn't like the women he usually met, polished, predictable, always angling for something. Zoe seemed real. "I'm Caleb," he said, though he was certain she already knew. "Zoe," she replied, meeting his eyes. Her voice was steady and confident, but there was a warmth in it that made him want to keep her talking. They fell into conversation effortlessly, which felt like slipping into a familiar rhythm. Zoe told him about her life on the slopes, how she'd grown up skiing in less glamorous places, scraping by to afford her first pair of boots. Her passion for the sport was infectious, and Caleb found himself sharing stories he rarely told about his childhood in a small town where winters were harsh, and his mother worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat after his father walked out. The wound of that abandonment lingered, a shadow that crept into his voice, despite his efforts to keep it light. Zoe listened, her dark eyes steady, not with pity, but with understanding. She shared her struggles, how she'd fought to be taken seriously in a sport dominated by privilege, how every success had been hard-won. There was no pretense between them, no need to impress. Under the stars, they were just 2 people finding solace in each other's stories. The cold drove them closer as the night deepened, their shoulders brushing as they laughed over a shared disdain for overpriced resort coffee. The chemistry was undeniable, a spark that grew with every glance, every word. When Caleb offered to walk her to her cabin, Zoe hesitated a moment before agreeing. The path wound through snow-draped pines, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound. She turned to him at her door, her breath visible in the frosty air. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. Caleb's heart raced. He knew what this could mean, the risk of complicating things, but the pull was too strong. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do." Inside the cabin was small but cozy, a fire crackling in the hearth. They didn't bother with pretense, no coffee, no small talk. The air between them was charged, and when Zoe stepped closer, her hand brushing his, it was all the invitation he needed. Their kiss was fierce, hungry, releasing everything they'd held back. The night unfolded in a blur of warmth and urgency, their bodies finding a rhythm as natural as their conversation. Under the stars, they gave in to something neither had expected, a connection that felt like it could shift the world. By morning, the snow had blanketed the ground, softening the edges of the night before. Caleb woke to find Zoe curled against him, her dark skin glowing in the pale light filtering through the window. He watched her for a moment, a strange ache in his chest. This wasn't just a fling, not for him, but the weight of his life, his business, his rival, the ghosts of his past loomed large. He slipped out quietly, leaving a note with his number and a simple message: "I want to see you again." Zoe woke to an empty bed, the note in her hand, both a promise and a question. She traced the words with her finger, her heart caught between hope and caution. She'd felt something real last night, but men like Caleb, rich, powerful, white, often came with complications she wasn't sure she could afford. Still, she tucked the note into her pocket, a small act of faith in the stars that had brought them together. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Caleb threw himself back into work, but Zoe lingered in his thoughts, her laugh, her strength, and how she'd looked at him like he was more than his name or wealth. He texted her, and to his relief, she replied. They met again for coffee in a quiet cafe at the edge of town. The conversation picked up where they'd left off, as if no time had passed. But in the background, Derek Holt was watching his spies, whispering about the woman who'd caught Caleb's attention. Derek saw an opportunity, a way to unsettle his rival. He began planting seeds, rumors that Zoe was after Caleb's money, that she was using him to climb the social ladder. Caleb dismissed the gossip at first. He knew Zoe, or at least he thought he did. But the whispers gnawed at him, stirring old insecurities. His father had left when he was 10, promising to return and never doing so. Trust came hard for Caleb, and Derek's lies found fertile ground in those doubts. He hasn't confronted Zoe yet. Instead, he watched her more closely, searching for signs he'd been wrong about her. Unaware of the rumors, Zoe felt the shift in Caleb's demeanor. His texts grew sporadic, his smiles tighter. She didn't know what had changed, but felt the distance growing. And then, a week after their night together, she discovered something that turned her world upside down. She was pregnant. The test sat on her bathroom counter, its two lines staring back at her like a challenge. She thought of Caleb, their shared connection, and the life she'd built on her own terms. Could she trust him with this? Would he believe her, or see her as another obligation, another trap? The stars that had once felt like a promise now seemed distant, their light cold and unyielding. Zoe made her choice. She packed her bags, left Aspen, and headed to Denver, determined to build a life for herself and the child she carried. She didn't tell Caleb, not because she didn't care, but because she feared he wouldn't believe her heart. As she drove away, the mountains fading in her rearview mirror, she promised her unborn child, "Will be enough." The city of Denver sprawled beneath a gray winter sky, its skyline starkly contrasting Aspen's mountains' wild open beauty. Zoe Patel had traded the crisp air of the slopes for the hum of urban life, settling into a modest apartment in a neighborhood where the rent didn't eat up her entire paycheck. She'd found work as a ski instructor at a nearby resort, commuting to the mountains when she could. Her days were long filled with lessons and the grind of building a new life, but her nights belonged to the small, precious weight growing inside her. The pregnancy was still a secret, known only to her, and the stars she sometimes gazed at from her tiny balcony. Zoe threw herself into her routine, teaching beginners to navigate the slopes with the same patience and fire she'd always brought to her work. Her students loved her sharp wit, her ability to make even the most timid skier feel invincible. But beneath her confidence, a quiet fear simmered. She hadn't heard from Caleb since she'd left Aspen, and though she'd told herself it was for the best, the silence stung. She'd seen how his eyes softened when they talked, felt the heat of his touch in that cabin. But she also knew men like him. Men with wealth and power often saw women like her as temporary, distracting from their real lives. The rumors she'd overheard before leaving, whispers that she was after his money, had only solidified her decision to go. In Aspen, Caleb Winters was drowning in his own world. The resort demanded his attention. Expansion plans, investor meetings, and the constant shadow of Derek Holt, who seemed to lurk in every deal gone sour. Derek had a knack for turning allies into enemies, and his latest move was a smear campaign against Caleb's leadership, questioning his focus. Caleb buried himself in work, but Zoe's absence was a wound he couldn't ignore. Her number still sat in his phone, unanswered texts piling up like snowdrifts. After a week, he'd stopped reaching out, convinced she'd walked away because she'd gotten what she wanted, a night with a billionaire, a story to tell. The rumors Derek had spread didn't help. Each one was a needle pricking at the trust Caleb had started to build. Derek Holt was a master of manipulation, his smile as sharp as the contracts he wielded. He'd seen Zoe at the gala, noticed how Caleb looked at her, and recognized an opportunity. In the weeks following her departure, he leaned harder into his campaign, dropping hints to Caleb's inner circle that Zoe had been asking about his wealth and assets. "She's a climber," Derek would say, his tone casual, but venomous. "You're not the first, Mark Caleb, and you won't be the last." Caleb wanted to dismiss it, but the seeds took root. His father's abandonment had left him with a deep-seated fear of being used, and Zoe's sudden disappearance felt like proof. One evening, Caleb sat in his office overlooking the slopes with a glass of whiskey. The resort was quiet, the season slowing, as spring crept closer. He scrolled through his phone, pausing on Zoe's last message. A simple, "Thanks for the coffee. Maybe next time." He'd meant to reply to ask her to meet again, but then the rumors started, and his pride got in the way. Now she was gone, and he didn't even know where. He thought of calling, but what would he say? Did you leave because of me, or because of what people said? The questions churned unanswered, and he set the phone down, the whiskey burning his throat. In Denver, Zoe faced her own battles. The pregnancy was starting to show a gentle curve she hid under loose sweaters. She hadn't told anyone, not her coworkers or a few friends in the city. Raising a child alone was daunting, but Zoe had never been one to back down. She'd grown up fighting for every opportunity, proving herself in a world that often overlooked her. This was just another challenge, another slope to conquer. She started saving every penny, cutting corners where she could. Her apartment was sparse. A second-hand couch, a small table, a bed she'd found on sale. But it was hers, and would be her child's. One night after a long day of teaching, Zoe sat on her balcony, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The city lights drowned out the stars, but she closed her eyes and pictured the Aspen sky the way it had looked that night with Caleb. She didn't regret leaving, but she wondered what might have been if she'd stayed and told him about the baby. Would he have believed her? Or would he have seen her as a liability, a woman trying to trap him? The thought made her stomach twist, and she pushed it away. She had to focus on the future, on the life she was building for her child. Meanwhile, Derek's influence grew. He'd planted enough doubt in Caleb's mind that even his closest advisors started questioning Zoe's intentions. "You barely knew her," one said over lunch, his tone gentle but pointed. "People talk, Caleb. Maybe she saw an opportunity." Caleb nodded, his jaw tight, but he wasn't so sure inside. Zoe hadn't asked for anything, not money, not favors. She'd shared his bed and stories, then left without a trace. That didn't feel like someone chasing a payout. Still, the doubt lingered, a crack in the foundation of what they'd started. Zoe's days blended into weeks, then months. The pregnancy progressed, and with it came a new kind of exhaustion. She'd always been strong, her body honed by years on the slopes, but now she felt the weight of every step. She kept teaching, though, refusing to let her circumstances define her. Her students noticed her resilience. Some even asked for extra lessons to hear her talk about techniques and finding balance in chaos. But at night alone, she'd rest her hand on her belly and whisper to the life inside her, promising a world where they'd never feel less than enough. Caleb, too, was changing. The resort was thriving, but success felt hollow. He'd walk the slopes at dusk, remembering Zoe's stories of racing down these same runs, her laughter echoing in his memory. He started asking questions discreetly at first, trying to find out where she'd gone. A contact in Denver mentioned a new instructor at a smaller resort, a woman who sounded a lot like Zoe. Caleb filed the information away, not ready to act, but unable to let it go. He didn't know about the pregnancy, about the child who carried his eyes. All he knew was that something was missing, and no amount of work could fill the space she'd left. Derek, sensing Caleb's distraction, doubled down. He leaked a story to a local blog, nothing overt, but enough to keep the rumors alive. Zoe Patel, the ambitious instructor who'd gotten too close to Caleb Winters. The post didn't name her outright, but the details were unmistakable. When Zoe saw it shared by a colleague who thought she should know, her heart sank. She'd left Aspen to escape this kind of scrutiny, but it had followed her. She wanted to fight back, to call out the lies, but she had no proof, and she couldn't risk the attention. Not now, not with a baby on the way. The crack between them widened, fueled by silence and mistrust. Zoe built her life in Denver piece by piece, determined to be the mother her child deserved. Caleb stayed in Aspen, his empire growing, but his heart heavy with questions he couldn't answer. And Derek watched, waiting for the moment to strike again, his plans for Zoe and Caleb far from over. The Denver skyline glittered faintly through the frost-covered window of Zoe Patel's small apartment, a modest one-bedroom, tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The hum of urban life outside was a constant reminder that she was far from the soaring peaks of Aspen. But Zoe had carved out a new rhythm here, one built on resilience and quiet determination. Her days revolved around her daughter Mia, a bright-eyed girl with a contagious laugh and a stubborn streak that Zoe both loved and recognized as her own. Raising Mia alone was no small feat, but every challenge, every late-night feed, every scraped-together dollar for daycare felt like a victory. Zoe's work as a ski instructor kept her tethered to the mountains she loved. She'd found a position at a resort just outside Denver, a more minor operation than the glitzy slopes of Aspen, but one where her skills were valued. Her mornings started early, bundling Mia into a puffy jacket and dropping her at a neighbor's before heading to the resort. Zoe was in her element on the slopes, guiding students through their first turns or coaching seasoned skiers to refine their form. Her voice carried a calm authority, her instructions sharp but encouraging, and her students often left feeling like they'd conquered more than just a run. But exhaustion settled in by evening when she returned to her apartment. She'd cook dinner simple meals like pasta or stir-fry, then curl up with Mia reading stories about brave adventurers or singing lullabies until her daughter's eyes fluttered shut. Mia was Zoe's anchor, her reason to keep pushing. The girl had an uncanny knack for finding joy in the most minor things: a stray leaf, a snowflake caught on her mitten, and her curiosity filled their tiny home with life. Yet there were moments when Zoe felt the weight of her choices. She'd left Aspen without telling Caleb about the pregnancy, convinced it was the only way to protect herself and her child. The rumors Derek Holt had spread, painting her as a gold digger, had stung deeply, and she couldn't shake the fear that Caleb would believe them. Still, late at night when Mia slept and the apartment was silent, Zoe's thoughts drifted to him, the way his smile had softened under the stars, the warmth of his hand in hers. She wondered where and what he was doing, but she never reached for her phone. That door, she told herself, was closed. In Aspen, Caleb Winters was a man defined by his empire. The Winters Resort had grown under his relentless focus, its reputation as a premier destination, now rivaling the best in the world. New lodges, expanded trails, and a state-of-the-art ski school had all borne his mark, but success came at a cost. Caleb's days were a blur of meetings, contracts, and negotiations, each a battle to stay ahead of competitors like Derek Holt. Ever the opportunist, Derek had shifted tactics since Zoe's departure, focusing on undercutting Caleb's business deals while maintaining a veneer of civility in public. Caleb saw through it, but the constant maneuvering left him drained. His nights were quieter, often spent alone in his sprawling chalet overlooking the slopes. The house was a masterpiece of glass and wood designed to impress, but felt empty. Caleb had stopped dating the fleeting connections he'd once chased, now seeming pointless. Zoe lingered in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. He tried to find her once a year after she left, but the trail went cold in Denver. He didn't push harder, telling himself it was better this way. He reasoned that she'd left for a reason, and maybe that reason was him. Yet the memory of their night together, the way she'd laughed, the way she'd seen him, not his wealth, clung to him, a reminder of what he'd lost. Derek's influence hadn't faded. The rumors about Zoe had quieted, but he kept them alive in subtle ways, dropping her name in conversations with Caleb's investors or hinting at her supposed ambition to mutual acquaintances. Caleb ignored most of it, but the doubts Derek had planted years ago still lingered. Had Zoe really cared or seen him as a stepping stone? The question gnawed at him, especially on nights when he walked the resort's trails, the snow crunching under his boots, the stars above a painful echo of that winter gala. Zoe's life in Denver wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She'd built a small network of friends, other instructors, a few parents from Mia's daycare who became her support system. Money was tight, and she often skipped meals to ensure Mia had enough. Yet there was a fierce pride in her independence. She'd opened a savings account for Mia, dreaming of the day she could afford a better apartment, maybe even a house with a yard where her daughter could play. Her evenings with Mia were sacred coloring books spread across the floor, or Mia's tiny hands helping stir a soup pot. Those moments, simple as they were, filled Zoe with a quiet joy that no rumor or hardship could touch. Caleb, meanwhile, was changing in ways he didn't fully understand. The resort's success had made him a public figure, but he felt like a stranger in his own life. He'd started volunteering at a local youth program, teaching kids from rough backgrounds how to ski. It was something Zoe had once talked about, giving back to those who didn't have the means to access the sport. He didn't admit it even to himself, but the work was a way of keeping her close. The kids reminded him of his own childhood, of the hunger and uncertainty that had followed his father's abandonment. He poured himself into it, finding a purpose his wealth couldn't buy. In Denver, Zoe faced her own trials. The resort where she worked was struggling, its owner cutting corners to stay afloat. Zoe's hours were reduced, forcing her to take private lessons to make ends meet. She hated leaving Mia with sitters for longer stretches, but had no choice. One night, after a particularly grueling day, she found Mia asleep on the couch, a crayon still clutched in her hand. Zoe sat beside her, brushing a curl from her daughter's face, and felt a pang of guilt. Was this enough? Could she give Mia the life she deserved? The questions kept her awake, but she pushed them down, focusing on the present. Mia's steady breathing and the warmth of their small home. Caleb's world too was shifting. Derek's latest move was a bid to buy a neighboring resort that could threaten Caleb's dominance in Aspen. The negotiations were tense, and Caleb threw himself into the fight, but his heart wasn't in it. He missed the clarity he'd felt with Zoe, the way she'd grounded him without trying. He started asking questions again, more seriously this time, hiring a discreet investigator to track her down. The report returned with a name and address, a ski instructor living in a modest apartment in Denver. Caleb held the paper in his hands, his thumb tracing the words, but he didn't act. Not yet. The fear of rejection, of confirming his doubts, held him back. Zoe's life, though challenging, was not without hope. She'd started teaching Mia to ski, taking her to the resort on weekends when she could. Mia was natural and fearless, which made Zoe's heart swell and ache simultaneously. She saw Caleb in her daughter's determination and how her eyes lit up when she mastered a new turn. Zoe never spoke of him to Mia, but she carried the weight of his absence, wondering if she'd made the right choice. The rumors Derek had spread had faded, but their impact lingered, reminding her why she'd left. She couldn't afford to trust again, not when Mia's future was at stake. As the years passed, both Zoe and Caleb built their lives apart, their paths shaped by their choices under that starry Aspen sky. Zoe's world was Mia, her laughter, questions, and boundless energy. Caleb's was his empire, a fortress of ambition that kept the world at bay. But neither could escape the pull of what they'd shared, a connection that lingered like the snow that never fully melted from the mountains. And in Denver, a little girl with her father's eyes was growing up, unaware of the man who didn't know she existed, or the storm waiting to bring them back together. The national ski competition in Denver was a spectacle of speed and skill, drawing crowds from across the country to the sprawling resort just outside the city. The slopes were alive with the scrape of skis and the roar of spectators, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of fresh snow. Caleb Winters had arrived that morning, his presence as the owner of Aspen's premier resort a draw for sponsors and media alike. He moved through the event with practiced ease, shaking hands, posing for photos, and fielding questions about his plans for the season. But beneath the polished exterior, he was restless, his thoughts scattered. He'd come to Denver on business, but the city held another pull, one he hadn't admitted to anyone, not even himself. Zoe Patel was on the slopes coaching a group of young skiers, competing in the junior division. She was a force of nature, her voice cutting through the wind as she guided her students, her movements fluid and commanding. The resort was her domain, even if it wasn't Aspen, and she thrived in the chaos of competition day. Her students looked to her with awe and trust, their confidence bolstered by her steady presence. Zoe had built a reputation here, not as a celebrity, but as a teacher who could turn raw talent into precision. She loved the work, but today her focus wavered. She'd heard Caleb was attending a rumor whispered among the instructors, which stirred something she'd tried to bury. Caleb spotted her from the edge of the slope, a figure in a red jacket moving with the same grace he remembered from 5 years ago. His breath caught the world narrowing to her silhouette against the snow. She was as vibrant as ever, her energy magnetic from a distance. He hadn't planned to seek her out, not consciously, but seeing her now, he couldn't look away. The years had done nothing to dull the spark he'd felt that night in Aspen, and the questions he'd carried since her departure surged to the surface. Why had she left? What had he done wrong? Zoe felt his gaze before she saw him. It was a prickle at the back of her neck, a sense of being watched that made her turn. Their eyes met across the crowd, and time folded in on itself for a moment. She saw the same intensity in his expression, the same unguarded look that had drawn her under the stars. But she also saw the years between them, the silence, the distance, the secret she carried in the form of a 4-year-old girl, now at daycare. Zoe's instinct was to turn away to protect the life she'd built, but Caleb was already moving toward her, his stride purposeful. "Zoe," he said, his voice low but precise, cutting through the crowd's noise. "It's been a while." She straightened, her heart pounding, but her face composed. "Caleb," she replied, her tone neutral. "Didn't expect to see you here." He studied her, searching for a crack in her calm. "I could say the same." "You're coaching now?" "Always have been," she said, crossing her arms. "This is my turf now." The conversation was careful, each word a step on thin ice. Caleb wanted to ask more, why she'd left where she'd been, but the crowd pressed in, and Zoe slipped away, calling out to a student who needed her. Caleb watched her go, the spark in his chest flaring into something hotter, more urgent. He didn't know what he'd expected, but her guardedness stung. He resolved to find her again to get answers. Zoe's heart didn't stop racing until she returned with her students, her focus forced back to the slopes. Seeing Caleb had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. He looked the same, sharp, confident, with that quiet intensity that had once made her feel seen. But she couldn't let herself fall back into that orbit. Mia was her priority, and Caleb was a complication she wasn't ready for. She didn't know if he'd heard about her life in Denver, but she wasn't about to volunteer the truth. Not yet. Over the next few days, Caleb lingered at the competition, his presence a constant hum in Zoe's awareness. He watched her from a distance, noting how she commanded respect from her students and moved with a strength that hadn't faded. He asked around, discreetly, learning that she'd built a life here, teaching, living quietly, no hint of scandal or ambition. The rumors Derek had spread years ago felt flimsier now, but they still lingered in Caleb's mind, a barrier he couldn't fully cross. Zoe, meanwhile, was wrestling with her own doubts. She'd seen how Caleb looked at her like he was searching for something. Part of her wanted to tell him about Mia, to lay it bare, but fear held her back. What if he didn't believe her? What if he tried to take Mia away, or worse, rejected her? The thought was unbearable. She kept her distance, avoiding the VIP areas where Caleb held court, focusing on her students and the competition that demanded her attention. But fate or chance had other plans. On the event's final day, Caleb found her in a quieter corner of the resort, near the lodge where families gathered. When he approached, Zoe was packing up her gear, her movements brisk. This time there was no escaping. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Zoe hesitated, her hands stilling on her bag. "I've got a lot to do, Caleb." "Just 5 minutes," he said, stepping closer. "Please." She sighed, nodding reluctantly. They moved to a bench outside the cold air, sharp against their faces. Caleb didn't waste time. "Why did you leave Zoe?" No warning, no explanation, just gone. Her jaw tightened, old wounds reopening. "You think I left for no reason? You think I wanted to?" She shook her head, her voice low but fierce. "You stopped texting Caleb. You pulled back. And then there were the rumors, people saying I was after your money. I heard them even if you didn't." He flinched, the truth hitting harder than he'd expected. "I didn't believe them." "Not really." "But you didn't deny them either," she shot back. "You let them sit there between us. I wasn't going to stay and beg you to trust me." Caleb wanted to argue, to say he'd been wrong, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he asked, "Where did you go? What's your life like now?" Zoe's eyes flickered, a wall going up. "I'm here, teaching, living. That's all you need to know." Her evasiveness frustrated him, but a small voice interrupted before he could press further. Mommy Mia came running from the lodge, her puffy jacket bouncing as she threw herself into Zoe's arms. Caleb froze his gaze, locking on the girl. She was small, vibrant, with a face that struck him like a lightning bolt. His eyes stared back at him, and the world tilted. Zoe's heart stopped. She hadn't wanted this, not like this. She scooped Mia up, holding her close, her voice steady despite the panic. "This is my daughter," she said, meeting Caleb's gaze. "Mia." Caleb's mind reeled, questions piling up faster than he could process. Daughter. Her daughter. But those eyes. He didn't ask, but the suspicion was there, sharp and undeniable. Zoe saw it, and her grip on Mia tightened. She wasn't ready for this, but the truth was out, hovering between them, like a storm waiting to break. The Denver ski resort buzzed with the fading energy of the national competition, its slopes now dotted with stragglers and staff, cleaning up the remnants of the event. Zoe Patel stood frozen, her daughter Mia clinging to her side, the little girl's curious eyes darting between her mother and the man who had just turned their world upside down. Caleb Winters stood a few feet away, his gaze locked on Mia, his mind racing to piece together the impossible. The girl's features, her sharp cheekbones, the shape of her eyes were a mirror to his own, a reflection he couldn't unsee. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions, the weight of 5 years pressing down like the snow piling up outside. Zoe's heart pounded, her arms tightening around Mia, as if to shield her from the storm she knew was coming. She dreaded this moment, the one where Caleb would see Mia and start asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. She'd kept her daughter's existence a secret, not out of spite, but out of fear. Fear that Caleb wouldn't believe her, that he'd see her as a threat, a woman trying to trap him with a child. The rumors Derek Holt had spread years ago still echoed in her mind, painting her as an opportunist. She couldn't risk Caleb thinking the same, not when Mia was her entire world. "Mia, honey, why don't you play with Sarah for a bit?" Zoe said, her voice steady, despite the chaos in her chest. She nodded toward a fellow instructor nearby, who was gathering equipment. Mia hesitated, sensing the tension, but obeyed, skipping off with a glance back at Caleb. Caleb waited until Mia was out of earshot, before speaking, his voice low, but intense. "Zoe is she." He couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too heavy and raw. Zoe met his gaze, her jaw tight. She wanted to deny it, to push him away and protect the life she'd built. But the truth was written in Mia's face. Lying now would only make things worse. "She's yours," she said finally, the words cutting through the air like a blade. "But don't think for a second that I planned this, or that I'm here to ask you for anything." Caleb's breath caught his world tilting. A daughter. He had a daughter. The realization hit him like an avalanche, stirring a mix of awe and pain. He wanted to ask why she hadn't told him, or kept this from him for years, but the hurt in her eyes stopped him. Instead, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me? All this time, Zoe, I had a right to know." Zoe's laugh was bitter, her arms crossing defensively. "A right? You pulled away, Caleb. After that night you went cold. I heard the rumors, people saying I was after your money, and then I found out I was pregnant. What was I supposed to do? Stay in Aspen and beg you to believe me? Risk you thinking I was just another schemer?" Her words stung, each one a reminder of his own failures. He'd let the rumors fester, let his doubts keep him from chasing her. He said, "I didn't believe them," but his voice lacked conviction. "Not fully. I didn't know what to think." "Exactly," Zoe snapped. "You didn't know, and I wasn't going to wait for you to figure it out. I had to protect myself and her." Caleb's eyes drifted to Mia, who was giggling with Sarah, oblivious to the moment's weight. His heart ached with a longing he hadn't known he could feel. He wanted to know her, to be part of her life, but the pain of Zoe's secrecy cut deep. "You kept her from me," he said, his voice breaking. 5 years, Zoe. I missed everything." Zoe's expression softened, but only slightly. "I did what I thought was best. You don't get to judge me for that." The conversation stalled, the gap between them, filled with years of silence and misunderstanding. Caleb wanted to push and demand more, but he could see the exhaustion in Zoe's posture and the way she held herself, like she was bracing for a fight. He backed off, his hands raised in a gesture of truce. "I'm not here to fight you," he said. I need time to process this." Zoe nodded, her eyes guarded. "So do I." Over the next few days, Caleb lingered in Denver, his business obligations at the competition, a convenient excuse to stay close. He watched Zoe from a distance, noting how she moved through her world with a quiet strength, coaching her students with a passion that hadn't dimmed. He saw Mia too, catching glimpses of her at the resort's daycare, or running to Zoe after a lesson. Each sighting was a jolt, a reminder of the life he hadn't known he had. He wanted to approach and ask her about her favorite games, or what made her laugh, but he didn't know how. The fear of being a bad father like his own had been loomed large, a shadow he couldn't shake. Zoe, meanwhile, was caught in her own turmoil. Caleb's presence was a constant pressure, a reminder of the secret she'd kept and the consequences now unfolding. She wanted to trust him and believed he could be the father Mia deserved, but trust was fragile. She'd built a life without him, one where she and Mia were enough. Letting him in risked everything, her independence, heart, and her daughter's stability. She kept him at arm's length, answering his texts with short, neutral replies, refusing to let the past pull her under. But Caleb wasn't one to give up. He started asking questions, piecing together Zoe's life in Denver through mutual contacts and careful observation. He learned about her struggles, the long hours, the small apartment, the way she poured everything into Mia. The more he learned, his anger at her secrecy softened, replaced by a grudging respect. She'd done it alone against the odds, and she'd done it well. But that didn't erase the ache of knowing he'd been excluded, or the growing desire to be part of Mia's life. One afternoon, as the competition wound, Caleb found himself at the resort's lodge, where families gathered for hot chocolate and warmth. Mia was there, sitting at a table with a coloring book, her small hands gripping a crayon with fierce concentration. Zoe was on the slopes, and the daycare worker stepped away momentarily. Caleb hesitated, then approached his heart pounding. "Hey there," he said, crouching to her level. "What are you drawing?" Mia looked up, her eyes bright and curious. "A mountain," she said, holding up the page. "Like where Mommy works." Caleb smiled, his chest tightening. "It's a good mountain. Do you like to ski?" She nodded, her curls bouncing. "Mommy teaches me. I'm gonna be fast like her." "I bet you will," he said, his voice soft. He wanted to say more, to tell her who he was, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he sat with her, listening as she chattered about snow stars and the dog she wanted someday. It was the simplest moment, but it changed everything. He saw himself in her, not just her features, but her fire, her joy. He wasn't ready to be a father, but he wanted to try. When Zoe returned and saw them together, her heart stopped. She scooped Mia up, her voice sharp. "What are you doing?" "Just talking," Caleb said, standing. She's incredible, Zoe." Zoe's eyes narrowed, protective and wary. "She is, and she's mine." Caleb wanted to argue, to say she was his too, but he saw the fear in Zoe's expression, the same fear he carried. He nodded, stepping back. "I'm not trying to take her from you. I want to know her." Zoe didn't respond, her arms tight around Mia. She walked away, her daughter's warmth grounding her, but Caleb's words lingered. She wasn't ready to let him in, but the truth was out, and there was no going back. The Denver resort had settled into a quieter rhythm after the national competition, its slopes now hosting casual skiers and locals, rather than the frenetic energy of elite athletes. Zoe Patel was back to her routine, coaching her students with the same focus that had earned her a reputation as one of the best instructors in the area. But Caleb Winter's presence lingered like a shadow, his unexpected reappearance, and the revelation about Mia, throwing her carefully built world into disarray. She'd spent 5 years guarding her independence daughter and heart. Now, with Caleb circling closer, that guard was starting to crack. Caleb was still in Denver, extending his stay under the guise of business meetings. In truth, he was grappling with the reality of Mia, his daughter, a fact that still felt surreal. He'd spent hours replaying his conversation with Zoe, her words sharp and defensive, her fear palpable. He understood why she'd kept Mia a secret, or at least he was starting to. The rumors Derek Holt had spread years ago poisoned the air between them, and Caleb's silence had done the rest. But understanding didn't erase the hurt or the fear that he wasn't cut out to be a father. His own father had walked out, leaving a void that shaped Caleb's life. The thought of failing Mia the same way was unbearable. He started small, testing the waters. He texted Zoe, asking if he could meet Mia again and maybe take her for ice cream. Zoe's reply was curt. "Not yet. I need time." Caleb respected her boundaries, but he didn't back off entirely. He showed up at the resort, watching her coach from a distance, noting the way Mia ran to her after daycare, her small arms wrapping around Zoe's legs. He wanted to be part of that, but didn't know how to bridge the gap. Zoe, meanwhile, was caught in a storm of her own making. She'd spent years convincing herself that she and Mia were enough, that Caleb's absence was a choice she'd made for their safety. With him standing in front of her asking to know their daughter, she felt the ground shifting. She wanted to believe he could be a good father, that he wasn't the man the rumors had painted him to be. But trust was hard, and the stakes were higher now. Mia was her world, and letting Caleb in meant risking everything she'd fought for. The tension came to a head one afternoon at the resort's lodge where Zoe was finishing a lesson. Caleb approached, his expression careful but determined. "Zoe, we need to talk about this. About Mia. About us." "There is no us," she said, her voice low, to avoid drawing attention. "There's Mia, and there's me. You don't get to walk in and claim a place. I'm not trying to claim anything, Caleb said, frustration creeping into his tone. I'm her father. I want to be there for her. Don't I get a say? Zoe's eyes flashed. You had a say 5 years ago when you let those rumors fester. I won't let you waltz in now and disrupt her life just because you're curious. Caleb's jaw tightened, the old wounds reopening. You think I wanted this? You think I planned to find out I have a daughter in the middle of a ski resort I'm trying, Zoe? But you're shutting me out. Because I have to. She snapped, her voice rising before she caught herself. She glanced around, lowering her tone. I've spent 5 years keeping her safe, keeping us stable. I won't lose that, because you've decided you want to play dad. The words hit Caleb like a blow, stirring the fear he'd carried since childhood, that he'd be no better than his father, and fail the people who needed him most. You think I'm not good enough, he said, his voice quiet, but raw. You think I'll let her down like he did to me? Zoe froze, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his words. For a moment, she saw the boy he'd been, who'd shared stories of abandonment under the Aspen stars. But before she could respond, a familiar figure approached Derek Holt, his smile sharp and predatory. Trouble in paradise, Derek said, his tone dripping with mock concern. He'd been at the resort for a separate event, but his presence was no coincidence. He'd been watching Caleb, waiting for an opening, and Zoe's return was the perfect opportunity. Stay out of this, Derek, Caleb said, his voice hard. Derek ignored him, turning to Zoe. You've been busy, haven't you? Building a nice little life here? However, I hear you've got some complications now. His eyes flicked toward Mia, who was playing nearby, oblivious to the tension. Zoe's stomach twisted, her instincts screaming danger. What do you want, Derek? She asked, her voice cold. Just making conversation, he said, his smile widening. But words getting around. People are starting to talk about you and Caleb, and that kid of yours. Sounds like a messy situation. Caleb stepped forward, his fists clenched. Back off, Holt. This doesn't concern you. Oh, but it does, Derek said, his tone casual but laced with venom. You're distracted, Winters, and distractions make you sloppy. I'm just looking out for my interests. Zoe's heart raced. She knew Derek's type, men who thrived on chaos, who used words like weapons. She'd dealt with his rumors before, and wasn't about to let him drag her down again. You don't scare me, she said, stepping closer. Whatever game you're playing, I'm not part of it. Derek chuckled, unfazed. We'll see about that. That night, the rumors started anew. Derek, ever the strategist, leaked a story to a local gossip site, hinting that Zoe was planning to sue Caleb for child support, painting her as a schemer, using her daughter to extort money. The post was vague enough to avoid legal trouble, but specific enough to stir trouble. Zoe saw it the next morning, shared by a colleague who thought she should know. Her hands shook as she read it, the words cutting deeper than expected. She'd worked hard to build a reputation, to create a stable life for Mia. Now Derek was threatening to unravel it. Caleb saw the post too, forwarded by an associate with a warning about potential PR fallout. His first instinct was anger, not at Zoe, but at Derek. He recognized the man's handiwork, the tactics he'd used 5 years ago to drive a wedge between them. But the rumors still stung, feeding into his doubts since Zoe left. Was she really planning to use Mia against him? He didn't want to believe it, but the fear was there, a whisper he couldn't silence. He confronted Zoe at the resort the next day, his temper fraying. Did you see what they're saying? About you, about Mia? Zoe's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. You think I had anything to do with that? You think I'd use my daughter to get at you? I don't know what to think. Caleb shot back, his frustration boiling over. You kept her from me for years, Zoe. Now this. It doesn't look good. She said it looks bad because someone wants it to, her voice trembling with anger. You know who's behind this. You've known all along. But instead of calling him out, you're standing here accusing me. Caleb wanted to argue to say he wasn't accusing her, but the words wouldn't come. He was scared of being used, failing Mia, and losing the fragile connection he'd just found. Zoe saw it in his eyes, and it broke something in her. She'd spent years proving she didn't need anyone and could stand on her own. But Caleb's doubt, his hesitation, felt like a betrayal. I'm done, she said, turning away. I'm not going to keep defending myself to you. Mia and I are fine without this. Caleb watched her go, his heart sinking. He knew she was right. Derek was the puppet master pulling strings to keep them apart. But the damage was done. The misunderstanding was a chasm, and neither knew how to cross it. As Zoe walked away, her daughter's hand in hers, Caleb felt the weight of his choices and the fear of losing them both. The Denver winter had settled in, cloaking the city in a chill that seeped into bones and buildings alike. Zoe Patel's small apartment felt like a fortress against the cold, its walls lined with Mia's drawings, and the faint scent of the lavender candle Zoe lit to unwind after long days on the slopes. Her life as a ski instructor was demanding but fulfilling, and her students were a source of pride as they carved their way down the mountains with growing confidence. Yet the stability she'd fought so hard to build was unraveling thread by thread under the weight of Derek Holt's calculated attacks. Derek had escalated his campaign against Zoe, moving beyond whispers to a full-on assault. Fueled by his anonymous tips, a local news outlet published a scathing article accusing Zoe of exploiting her students, inflating her credentials, and using her connection to Caleb Winters to boost her reputation. The claims were baseless, but spread like wildfire across social media, amplified by ski blogs and gossip sites. Zoe's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues and clients, some supportive, others questioning. Her small ski school, a labor of love she'd built from scratch, was teetering on the edge. Sponsors who had once praised her began pulling back their emails, polite but firm, citing concerns about her reputation. Zoe sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop casting harsh light on her face as she read the latest comments online. Mia was asleep in the next room, her soft breathing a reminder of why Zoe couldn't afford to break. She'd faced challenges before, skeptics who doubted her skills, financial struggles that tested her resolve, but this felt different. Derek's attacks were personal, designed to strip away everything she'd earned. She knew he was targeting her to get to Caleb, to destabilize his rival by hitting where it hurt most. But knowing the game didn't make it easier to play. Caleb, meanwhile, was grappling with his own battles. Back in Aspen, the Winters resort was thriving, but the constant pressure from Derek's maneuvers kept him on edge. Derek had been quietly buying up shares in smaller resorts, positioning himself as a direct threat to Caleb's empire. The rumors about Zoe were just another weapon in his arsenal, a way to distract Caleb and tarnish his image by association. Caleb had seen the article, and though he recognized Derek's handiwork, the accusations stirred the doubts he'd tried to bury. Had he misjudged Zoe? Was she as innocent as she claimed, or was there truth to the narrative Derek was spinning? He couldn't shake the image of Mia, her bright eyes like his own, her laughter a spark that lit something deep within him. He wanted to believe in Zoe, to trust that she'd kept Mia a secret out of necessity, not manipulation. But the public attacks on her character were relentless, and they fed into the fears he'd carried since childhood. Fears of being used, of being left behind. He spent sleepless nights in his chalet, the vast windows framing the snowy peaks, wondering if he'd lost his chance to know his daughter because of his hesitation. Zoe's days grew heavier. She showed up to work, her head held high, but the whispers followed. A few students canceled lessons citing scheduling conflicts, though Zoe knew better. The resort's management, wary of the bad press, started scrutinizing her work more closely, questioning her methods in meetings that felt like interrogations. She fought back with facts, her certifications, her students' progress, her years of dedication, but the damage was done. Her ski school's bookings dwindled, and the savings she'd scraped together for Mia's future were now a lifeline to keep the business afloat. One evening, after tucking Mia into bed, Zoe sat on her balcony, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. She'd always been strong, but this felt like a fight she couldn't win alone. She thought of Caleb, how he'd looked at Mia, the mix of awe and pain in his eyes. Part of her wanted to reach out to ask for his help, but pride held her back. She'd built this life without him, and she wasn't sure she could trust him not to let her down again. Caleb, too, was at a crossroads. He'd hired a private investigator to dig into Derek's recent moves, and the findings were damning. The articles, the social media posts, the anonymous tips, all traced back to Derek or his associates. Caleb realized he'd been played, that Derek had used Zoe as a pawn to keep him off balance. The revelation shifted something in him. He couldn't undo the past, but he could act now. He booked a flight back to Denver, determined to confront the mess head-on. He found Zoe at the resort coaching a small group of kids on a beginner slope. She was patient, her voice steady as she guided them through a turn, but Caleb could see the strain in her posture, the way her shoulders tensed when she thought no one was watching. He waited until her lesson ended, then approached, his hands shoved in his pockets to keep from fidgeting. "Zoe," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." She turned, her expression guarded. "I've got nothing to say, Caleb. I'm handling it." "You're not," he said, stepping closer. "I know about the articles. I know Derek's behind them. This isn't just about you. It's about me, too. He's using you to get to me." Zoe's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "And whose fault is that? You let him poison the air between us 5 years ago, and now he's doing it again. Don't act like you're the victim here." Caleb flinched, but he didn't back down. "I'm not saying I'm innocent. I messed up, Zoe. I let my doubts get in the way. But I'm here now, and I'm not letting Derek ruin you to get to me." She wanted to believe him, but the hurt ran deep. "What do you want, Caleb? To play hero? To save me so you can feel better about yourself?" "I want to make this right," he said, his voice raw. "For you, for Mia, for us." The mention of Mia softened Zoe's resolve, but only slightly. "Mia's not your bargaining chip," she said. "You don't get to use her to fix your guilt." "I'm not," he said, his eyes pleading. "I want a chance to know her, to help you. Let me do that." Zoe hesitated, torn between her need for independence and the reality of her situation. Derek's attacks were relentless, and she was running out of options. "Fine," she said finally. "But this doesn't mean I trust you. It means I'm desperate." Caleb nodded, accepting the terms. "I'll take it." Over the next week, Caleb worked quietly behind the scenes. He reached out to his PR team, tasking them with countering the narrative about Zoe. He contacted the resort's management, vouching for her skills and reputation, using his influence to shore up their confidence in her. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. Zoe noticed the shift: fewer sidelong glances from colleagues, a few sponsors reaching out to reaffirm their support. But she kept her distance from Caleb, wary of his motives. Derek, however, wasn't done. He sensed Caleb's involvement and doubled down, leaking a new story that accused Zoe of falsifying student records to inflate her school's success. The claim was absurd, but it gained traction, threatening to tip Zoe's business over the edge. She sat in her apartment, staring at the latest article, her hands trembling. Mia was playing nearby, oblivious to the storm, and Zoe fought to keep her composure. She couldn't let her daughter see her break. Caleb saw the article too, and he didn't hesitate this time. He knew Derek was the source, and he was done playing defense. He called a meeting with his legal team, laying out everything he'd learned about Derek's tactics. It was time to fight back, not just for himself, but for Zoe and the daughter he was only beginning to know. The Denver skyline shimmered under a rare, clear night, the stars faint but visible from Zoe Patel's balcony. Inside her apartment was quiet. Mia tucked into bed with a stuffed bear clutched in her arms. Zoe sat with a cup of tea, the warmth doing little to ease the knot in her chest. The past weeks had been a relentless siege. Derek Holt's attacks on her reputation had cost her students sponsors and the fragile peace she'd built for herself and Mia. Caleb Winter's return had only complicated things, stirring emotions she'd buried years ago and forcing her to confront the possibility of letting him into their lives. Zoe's heart was a battlefield. She wanted to trust Caleb, to believe he could be the father Mia deserved, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd spent 5 years proving she didn't need anyone building a life for her daughter on her own terms. Caleb's presence threatened that independence, and his offers of help felt like a tether she wasn't sure she could accept. Yet she couldn't deny how Mia's face lit up when she talked about the lovely man who'd sat with her at the lodge, or how Caleb's eyes softened when he looked at their daughter. It was a dangerous pull that made Zoe question everything she'd thought she knew. Caleb was no less conflicted. He'd returned to Denver with a fire in his chest, determined to undo Derek's damage and prove himself to Zoe. But the more he learned about her life, the long hours, the sacrifices, the fierce love she poured into Mia, the more he doubted himself. He'd grown up with a father who walked away leaving scars that shaped his every choice. The fear of being that kind of man, of failing Mia, the way his father had failed him, was a constant weight. He wanted to protect Zoe and give Mia the life he hadn't had, but he didn't know if he was capable. And Zoe's guardedness, her refusal to let him in fully, only deepened his doubts. He'd worked tirelessly to counter Derek's attacks, using his resources to push back against the false narratives. His PR team had managed to get the resort's management to issue a statement supporting Zoe, and a few sponsors had reconsidered their withdrawals after Caleb personally vouched for her. But the damage was deep, and Zoe's ski school was still on the brink. Caleb knew he couldn't fix everything, but was determined to try. He started spending more time at the resort, not just to monitor Derek's moves, but to be near Zoe and Mia, hoping small moments might build the trust he'd lost. One afternoon, he found Mia at the resort's daycare, drawing a picture of a skier zooming down a slope. Zoe was still teaching, so Caleb sat with her, keeping his distance, but engaging when she looked up. "Is that you?" he asked, pointing to the skier. Mia shook her head, her curls bouncing. "That's Mommy. She's the fastest." Caleb smiled, his heart aching. "She's pretty amazing, huh?" Mia nodded, then held up another drawing. A family of 3 stick figures under a starry sky. "This is me, Mommy, and someone else," she said, her voice shy. Caleb's breath caught. He wanted to ask if the third figure was him, but he didn't dare. Instead, he said, "That's a great picture. You've got a lot of stars up there." "Mia loves stars," she said, her eyes bright. "Mommy says they're like wishes you can see." He swallowed hard, the simplicity of her words cutting through his defenses. He wanted to be part of that world and be someone else in her drawing, but he didn't know how to earn it. Zoe, meanwhile, was struggling to keep her head above water. The latest article cost her another sponsor, and the resort's management pressured her to address the rumors publicly. She refused, knowing that engaging would only fuel the fire. Instead, she focused on her students, pouring her energy into their progress. But the strain was taking its toll. She was exhausted. Her nights were spent worrying about bills and Mia's future, and her days were spent fending off questions from colleagues. Caleb's efforts to help were a lifeline, but they came with strings she wasn't ready to untangle. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Caleb showed up at her apartment unannounced. Zoe opened the door, her expression wary. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low. "I know you don't trust me, and I get why. But I'm not going anywhere, Zoe. Not this time." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You say that now, but what happens when things get hard? When does Derek come at you again? Or when being a dad isn't as easy as you think?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I'm not my father. I won't walk away from her. Or you." Zoe wanted to believe him, but the words felt too big, too heavy. "You don't know what it's like," she said, her voice breaking and raising her alone, fighting for every inch of this life. "I can't afford to let you in and then watch you leave." "I'm not asking you to make it easy," he said. "I'm asking for a chance." Mia's voice interrupted, calling from inside. "Mommy, who's here?" Zoe hesitated, then stepped aside, letting Caleb in. Mia ran to him, her face lighting up. She said, "You're the nice man holding up her latest drawing." Caleb crouched to her level, listening as she explained the picture, and Zoe watched, her heart torn. Mia's joy was pure, untainted by the past, but Zoe couldn't shake the fear that letting Caleb in would cost her the freedom she'd fought for. As the days passed, the tension between them grew. Caleb continued to protect Zoe's reputation, but Derek's influence was relentless. A new rumor surfaced, suggesting Zoe had been involved in a financial scam at her ski school. The claim was fabricated, but enough to push her business to the breaking point. Zoe sat with her accountant, staring at numbers that didn't add up, her dreams of stability slipping away. She thought of Mia, of the life she'd promised her, and felt a surge of defiance. She wasn't going to let Derek win. Caleb, too, was reaching a breaking point. He knew Derek was behind the latest attack and was done playing by the rules. He met with his legal team, laying out a plan to expose Derek's tactics once and for all. But the stakes were higher now, not just his business, but Zoe's livelihood and Mia's future. He looked at the drawing Mia had given him tucked into his wallet and felt a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the family he hadn't known he wanted and the woman he'd never stopped loving. The Denver Convention Center buzzed with the energy of the annual Ski Industry Summit, a gathering of resort owners, sponsors, and media that set the tone for the season ahead. The air was thick with ambition deals being struck over coffee and contracts signed under the glow of chandeliers. Caleb Winters stood at the edge of the main hall, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the turmoil inside him. He'd come prepared, armed with evidence of Derek Holt's manipulations, ready to turn the tables on the man who'd spent years undermining him and Zoe Patel. The stakes were higher than ever. Not just his reputation, but Zoe's livelihood, and their daughter Mia's future hung in the balance. Zoe was absent from the summit, her focus on the resort where she was fighting to keep her ski school afloat. Derek's relentless attacks had taken their toll. Sponsors had withdrawn, students had canceled, and the media scrutiny was unrelenting. The latest rumor, a fabricated claim of financial misconduct, had pushed her business to the brink of collapse. She'd spent the morning on the phone with her accountant, trying to salvage what was left, her heart heavy with the fear that she might fail Mia. Yet even in her exhaustion, she refused to give up, driven by the fierce love for her daughter and the stubborn pride that had carried her through years of hardship. Caleb had been working behind the scenes, his legal team digging into Derek's financial dealings and media leaks. They'd uncovered a trail of payments to bloggers, anonymous tipsters, and even a few resort insiders who'd helped spread the lies about Zoe. The evidence was damning, but Caleb knew exposing Derek would require more than documents. It would take a public stand, something he'd avoided for years. He'd always preferred to let his success speak for itself. But this was different. This was about Zoe Mia and the family he was only beginning to understand he wanted. The summit's main event was a panel discussion with industry leaders, including Derek, who sat at the center of the stage, his smile polished and predatory. Caleb was in the audience, his presence unannounced, but felt by those who knew the rivalry between the two men. As Derek spoke about innovation and competition, his words laced with subtle jabs at Caleb's resort. Caleb felt the familiar burn of anger, but he held back, waiting for the right moment. That moment came during the Q&A, when a journalist asked about the recent controversies surrounding smaller ski schools, a clear nod to Zoe's situation. Derek leaned into the microphone, his tone dripping with false concern. "It's unfortunate when individuals exploit the industry's trust," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "We've seen cases where instructors inflate their credentials or misuse funds, hurting everyone. The industry deserves transparency." Caleb stood, his voice cutting through the room before he could second-guess himself. "Transparency like yours, Derek?" The crowd turned, murmurs rippling through the hall. "You've been awfully transparent about your tactics, paying off bloggers, planting false stories, targeting honest people to clear your path." The room went silent, Derek's smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "That's a bold accusation, Caleb," he said, recovering quickly. "Care to back it up?" Caleb stepped forward, and his legal team was ready with a folder of evidence. "I've got bank records, emails, and testimonies that tie you to the smear campaign against Zoe Patel," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "You've been trying to ruin her to get to me, and I'm done letting you play your games." The moderator tried to intervene, but the crowd was hooked, phones out, recording every word. Caleb laid out the evidence: dates, payments, names, each detail a blow to Derek's carefully crafted image. The audience gasped as he revealed a leaked email where Derek instructed a contact to ensure the Patel story sticks. Derek's composure cracked, his protests growing weaker as Caleb continued, his voice rising with conviction. Caleb said, "This isn't just about business," turning to the crowd. "This is about a woman who's dedicated her life to this sport, who's built something real, despite people like you trying to tear her down. Zoe Patel is the mother of my daughter, and I'll be damned if I let you destroy her for your own gain." The room erupted, journalists scrambling to take notes, cameras flashing. Derek tried to deflect, accusing Caleb of defamation, but the evidence was too strong. By the time the panel ended, Derek's influence was crumbling, his allies distancing themselves as the truth spread. Caleb left the stage, his heart pounding, knowing he'd taken a risk that could change everything. Zoe heard about the confrontation hours later when a colleague texted her a link to a live stream. She watched, her breath catching, as Caleb stood up to Derek, his words fierce and unyielding. She'd never seen him like this, publicly vulnerable, fighting for her in a way she hadn't expected. But her relief was short-lived. That evening, Derek struck back, releasing a doctored video on social media that showed Zoe yelling at a student, edited to make her seem abusive. The clip was a lie stitched together from unrelated moments, but it spread faster than Caleb's defense, reigniting the firestorm around her. Zoe sat in her apartment, the video playing on her laptop, her hands trembling. Mia was asleep, unaware of the chaos, but Zoe felt the weight of it crushing her. She'd fought so hard, and now it seemed like it wasn't enough. She thought of calling Caleb, of thanking him for what he'd done, but the video stopped her. What if he believed it? What if this was the final straw that made him walk away? Caleb, meanwhile, was livid. He'd seen the video and recognized it for what it was: a desperate move by a cornered man. He called his PR team, demanding they trace the video's origins and prepare a counter-statement. He texted Zoe, asking her to meet, but her reply was short. "I can't right now. Too much." He understood her need for space, but he wasn't giving up. He drove to her apartment, knocking softly to avoid waking Mia. When Zoe opened the door, her eyes were red, and her expression was weary. "What do you want, Caleb?" she asked, her voice flat. "He said I saw the video stepping inside when she didn't stop him. It's fake. I know it, and I'm going to prove it. But I need you to trust me, Zoe, just a little." She shook her head, her arms crossed. "Trust you? After everything I've been fighting this alone for years, Caleb. I don't know how to let you in without losing myself." He said, "I'm not asking you to lose anything." His voice soft, but urgent. "I'm asking you to let me fight with you. For you. For Mia." Zoe looked at him, the man who'd once broken her heart, who now stood ready to defend her. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of being hurt again was a wall she couldn't easily climb. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded, accepting the small concession. He left, determined to dismantle Derek's lies, knowing the battle was far from over. The video had done damage, but Caleb's public stand shifted the narrative, planting doubt about Derek's credibility. As he drove back to his hotel, he thought of Mia's drawing the family under the stars and felt a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He wasn't just fighting for Zoe's reputation. He was fighting for a future he hadn't dared to dream of until now. The Denver winter deepened the city, wrapped in a quiet that belied the storm still raging in Zoe Patel's life. Her ski school was hanging by a thread, the fallout from Derek Holt's doctored video eroding what little support she had left. She'd spent the morning fielding calls from concerned parents, reassuring them that the video was a lie, but the damage was done. Her reputation, livelihood, and dreams for Mia were at risk, and the weight was crushing. Yet Caleb Winter's stand at the ski industry summit had sparked a flicker of hope, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. Caleb was back in Denver, his hotel room, a makeshift command center, working with his team to dismantle Derek's lies. The video had been a low blow, but his investigators had already traced its origins to a freelance editor known to work for Derek's associates. Caleb was relentless, pushing for a public retraction and preparing to sue for defamation. But his focus wasn't just on the legal battle. He was fighting for Zoe and Mia to have the chance to be part of their lives. The memory of Mia's drawing a family under the stars drove him a vision of what could be if he could earn Zoe's trust. Zoe, meanwhile, was wrestling with her own heart. Caleb's defense at the summit had shaken her, forcing her to confront the possibility that he wasn't the man she'd feared he'd become. She'd spent years guarding herself and Mia, building walls to protect them from hurt. But Caleb's persistence and willingness to risk his own reputation for hers were chipping away at those walls. She wanted to believe in him, but the fear of losing her independence, of being seen as a burden, held her back. One evening, Caleb showed up at her apartment, his expression earnest but hesitant. Zoe let him in, her guard still up, but softening. Mia was in her room coloring, leaving them a rare moment to talk. "I owe you an apology," Caleb said, his voice low. "Not just for now, but 5 years ago. I let my fears, my past, get in the way. I didn't trust you, and I didn't fight for you. I'm sorry, Zoe." She looked at him, the sincerity in his eyes cutting through her defenses. "I was scared too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I found out about Mia, I didn't know if you'd believe me or think I was trying to trap you. I couldn't take that chance." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. "I get why you left, but I'm here now and want to be here for her, for both of you. I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance." Zoe's eyes searched his, looking for the man she'd met under the Aspen stars, who shared her laughter and stories. "I'm scared, Caleb," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been on my own for so long. I don't know how to let you in without losing myself." "You won't lose yourself," he said, stepping closer. "I don't want to take anything from you. I want to be part of this part of you and Mia. We can figure it out together." The moment hung between them, fragile and heavy. Zoe felt the weight of her fears and the pull of possibility. She nodded a small gesture that felt monumental. "Okay," she said, "but we go slowly for Mia's sake." Caleb's relief was palpable, a smile breaking through his tension. "Slow. I can do that." Over the next few days, they took tentative steps toward reconciliation. Caleb started spending time with Mia, small moments that built a fragile bridge, reading her stories, helping her with her drawings, teaching her to tie her shoes. Zoe watched, her heart torn between joy and caution. Mia's laughter was a balm, but Zoe couldn't shake the fear that this could all fall apart. Meanwhile, Caleb's team made progress against Derek. The doctored video was debunked, and the original footage was released to show Zoe's true professionalism. The media began to shift, some outlets retracting their stories, and others turning their scrutiny on Derek. His influence was waning, but he wasn't done. In a final act of desperation, he leaked a story claiming Zoe and Caleb were colluding to frame him, a last-ditch effort to salvage his reputation. The new rumor hit Zoe hard, threatening to undo Caleb's progress. She confronted him at the resort, her voice shaking with frustration. "This is never going to stop. Every time we take a step forward, he pulls us back." Caleb took her hands, his grip steady. "He's losing Zoe. He's desperate. We're stronger than this." She looked into his eyes, seeing the man who'd fought for her, and stood up to Derek in front of the world. For the first time, she felt a spark of trust, small but real. "I want to believe you," she said. "I'm trying." "That's enough," he said, his voice soft. "It's enough for now." As they stood together, Mia ran up, her latest drawing clutched in her hands. "Look, Mommy. Look, Caleb," she said, holding up a picture of 3 figures holding hands under a starry sky. Zoe's breath caught, and Caleb's eyes glistened. At that moment, they both knew they were fighting for more than just reputations. They were fighting for a family and a future under the stars. The Denver winter was unrelenting, the city shrouded in a bitter cold that mirrored the tension gripping Zoe Patel's life. Her small apartment, once a sanctuary for her and her daughter Mia, felt like a fortress under siege. Derek Holt's campaign against her had reached a new low. His latest move, a dangerous escalation that threatened her reputation, her safety, and that of her daughter. Zoe's ski school barely survived its bookings, reduced to a trickle as sponsors and students pulled away under the weight of fabricated scandals. Yet, amidst the chaos, a fragile hope had taken root. Caleb Winter's unwavering commitment to fight for her and Mia. This promise was now being tested in ways neither had anticipated. Caleb had returned to Denver with a fire in his chest, his resolve hardened after exposing Derek's manipulations at the ski industry summit. The public tide was turning, with media outlets retracting false stories and Derek's allies distancing themselves. But Derek was not a man to go quietly. Cornered and desperate, he'd resorted to tactics that went beyond rumors, hiring a shadowy figure to intimidate Zoe and Mia, hoping to force her to back down and weaken Caleb's resolve. The threats started subtly, a cryptic note left at Zoe's apartment, a late-night phone call with no one on the line, but they were enough to set her on edge. Zoe stood in her kitchen, staring at the latest note, its words scrawled in jagged handwriting, "Back off or the kid pays." Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with a fierce protective rage. She'd faced countless challenges, financial struggles, public scrutiny, the weight of raising Mia alone. But this was different. This was her daughter, the one constant in her life, the reason she'd fought so hard. She tucked the note away, determined not to let Mia see her falter. But the threat lingered like a shadow, darkening every moment. Caleb sensed the shift in Zoe's demeanor when he visited the next day. She was quieter, her eyes darting to the windows, her hands restless. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low but insistent. They were in her living room, Mia playing nearby with a puzzle, her laughter contrasting with their tension. Zoe hesitated, her instinct to handle things alone, warring with the trust she'd started to build with Caleb. Finally, she handed him the note, her jaw tight. "This came yesterday. I don't know who sent it, but I can guess." Caleb's face darkened as he read the words, his fingers tightening around the paper. "Derek." He said the name, a growl. He'd known Derek was ruthless, but this crossed a line he hadn't imagined. "He's desperate, Zoe. He's losing, and he's lashing out." Lashing out. Zoe's voice was sharp, her eyes blazing. "This isn't just about him losing. This is about Mia, my daughter, our daughter. I can't let him near her." Caleb met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. "He won't touch her. I swear it." Zoe wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing clawing at her chest. "You can't promise that, Caleb. Not when he's willing to go this far." "I can, and I will," he said, stepping closer. "I've let you down before, and I'm not doing it again. You and Mia are my family now. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." The words hit Zoe like a wave, stirring a mix of hope and terror. She'd spent years building a life without him, proving she didn't need anyone. But now, with Derek's threats looming, she realized she couldn't do this alone. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, but we do this together." Caleb wasted no time. He contacted his security team and hired a private firm to monitor Zoe's apartment and the resort where she worked. He also contacted his investigators, who were already building a case against Derek. They'd uncovered evidence of his involvement in the threats, a burner phone linked to one of his associates, a payment trail pointing to the figure who'd left the note. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but enough to act. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Late one evening, as Zoe walked Mia home from daycare, a man approached them in the parking lot, his face obscured by a hood. "You need to stop," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Drop the fight, or it gets worse." Zoe's heart stopped, her arms wrapping protectively around Mia, who clung to her leg, confused but sensing the danger. Before she could respond, Caleb appeared, having followed them from the resort at a distance. He stepped between Zoe and the man, his stance unwavering. "Back off," he said, his voice cold. "You're done here." The man hesitated, sizing Caleb up, but the sound of approaching security guards, alerted by Caleb's team, sent him running into the night. Zoe's knees buckled, her grip on Mia tightening as she fought to stay calm. Caleb knelt beside them, his hand on Zoe's shoulder, his eyes searching hers. "You're okay," he said, his voice steady. "Both of you." Mia's small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, who was that?" Zoe forced a smile, brushing a curl from Mia's face. "Just someone who got lost. Sweetheart, we're fine now." Caleb escorted them home, and his security team swept the area to ensure no further threats. Once Mia was asleep, he and Zoe sat in the living room, the weight of the night pressing down. "This has to end," Zoe said, her voice trembling with anger. "I can't live like this, wondering if she's safe." "It will," Caleb said, his jaw tight. "I've got enough on Derek to bury him. The threats, the payments, the video. It's all coming back to him. I'm meeting with the police tomorrow." Zoe looked at him, seeing the man who'd once let doubts drive them apart, now standing as her shield. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice soft. "You could walk away, go back to your life in Aspen." "Why stay?" Caleb's eyes met hers, raw and unguarded. "Because I love her, Zoe, and I love you. I've spent 5 years regretting the night I let you go. I'm not making that mistake again." The confession hung between them, a truth neither was fully ready to face. Zoe's heart raced, but she didn't respond, not yet. Instead, she nodded silently, acknowledging the bond they were rebuilding. The next day, Caleb took his evidence to the authorities. The burner phone, the payment trail, and witness statements from the resort clearly depicted Derek's involvement. By evening, the police had issued a warrant for Derek's arrest, charging him with harassment and extortion. The news broke online, and the industry reeled as Derek's empire crumbled. His allies abandoned him, and his resorts faced scrutiny as investors pulled out. Zoe watched the coverage from her apartment, Mia asleep in her lap. The relief was overwhelming, but came with a new fear. What came next? Caleb had proven himself risking everything to protect them, but letting him into their lives meant surrendering a piece of the independence she'd fought for. As she looked at Mia, her daughter's peaceful face reminded her of what mattered most. Zoe knew she had to make a choice. Caleb returned that night, his expression weary but triumphant. "It's over," he said, sitting across from her. "Derek's in custody. He can't hurt you anymore." Zoe nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying more weight than she could express. "For her. For us." Caleb reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I meant what I said, Zoe. I'm here for as long as you'll let me." She didn't pull away, a small step toward the future they might build together. The threat was gone, but the journey was far from over. And under the Denver stars, they stood at the edge of something new, fragile, but full of possibility. A year had passed since the storm nearly tore Zoe Patel and Caleb Winters apart, and the mountains of Aspen were once again blanketed in snow, their peaks glowing under a starlit sky. The Winters resort bustled with life skiers carving down the slopes, families laughing in the lodge, the air alive with the promise of winter. Zoe and Caleb had returned to where their story began, not as strangers bound by a fleeting night, but as a family, their daughter Mia, the heart of their new beginning. Zoe had opened her own ski school at the resort, a dream she'd nurtured through years of struggle. The school was small, but growing its reputation built on her skill and passion. She moved through her days with confidence that came from knowing she'd fought for this fought. Through Derek Holt's lies, her own fears, and the uncertainty of letting Caleb back into her life. Her students, a mix of locals and tourists, thrived under her guidance, their progress a testament to her resilience. The scars of the past year were still there, but they'd faded, softened by the life she was building. Caleb had changed too. The resort was still his empire, but he'd found a balance, delegating more to spend time with Zoe and Mia. He'd sold his sprawling chalet, trading it for a cozy cabin near the slopes, a home filled with Mia's toys and Zoe's warmth. The fear of being a bad father, like the one who'd abandoned him, still lingered, but it no longer defined him. He'd proven himself to Zoe, Mia, and himself through the battles they'd faced together. Derek's arrest had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, where Caleb was learning to be the man he'd always wanted to be. Mia was the light that bound them. She was a whirlwind of energy racing down beginner slopes with a fearlessness that made Zoe laugh and Caleb's heart swell. She'd taken to skiing like she was born for it, her small frame bundled in a bright jacket as she followed Zoe's instructions. But the quiet moments coloring with Caleb, curling up with Zoe for bedtime stories, filled their home with joy. Mia's drawings now covered the cabin's walls, each a snapshot of their life together, 3 figures under a starry sky, holding hands, smiling. One evening, as the resort settled into the hush of night, Zoe, Caleb, and Mia bundled up and walked to a clearing near the cabin. The snow crunched under their boots, the air sharp with the scent of pine. Above them, the stars glittered, a vast canvas that stretched back to the night they'd met. Zoe carried a thermos of hot chocolate, Caleb a blanket, and Mia a small lantern that bobbed in her hands. They spread the blanket on the snow, sitting close, as Mia pointed out constellations, her voice bright with wonder. "Look, Mommy," she said, "that's the Big Dipper," her finger tracing the sky. Zoe smiled, tucking a curl behind Mia's ear. "Good eye, sweetheart. What else do you see?" Caleb leaned back, his arm around Zoe, his eyes on their daughter. "She's got your spark," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And your stubbornness." Zoe teased her shoulder, brushing his. They laughed, the sound mingling with Mia's chatter, the stars above, a silent witness to their journey. Caleb thought back to that first night, the gala, where he'd found Zoe on the terrace, her presence a beacon in his restless world. He'd been a man defined by his wealth, ambition, and fears. Now he was a father, a partner, a man who'd learned to fight for what mattered. Zoe, too, was reflecting. She'd come to Aspen 5 years ago as an instructor, with nothing but her skills and her determination. She'd left with a broken heart and a secret, building a life for Mia on her own terms. The road back to Caleb had been fraught with pain and doubt, but it had led her here to this moment, where she felt whole in a way she hadn't thought possible. She looked at Caleb, his face soft in the starlight, and felt warmth beyond the blanket around them. "Mia," Caleb said, pulling their daughter onto his lap, "you know what those stars mean?" She tilted her head, her eyes wide. "Wishes." "More than that," he said, glancing at Zoe. "They're promises. Promises that we'll always be here together, no matter what." Mia grinned, snuggling against him. "Like a family." "Precisely like a family," Zoe said, her voice catching. She reached for Caleb's hand, their fingers intertwining, a silent vow under the stars. As Mia ran off to chase a snowflake, her laughter echoing, Zoe and Caleb sat in the quiet, the weight of their past a distant memory. They'd faced rumors, threats, and their own fears, emerging stronger, not just as individuals, but as a unit. The resort glowed in the distance, a symbol of their shared journey, but the stars above held their promise, a life built on love, trust, and the courage never to let go. They stayed there, wrapped in the blanket, watching Mia play, and the stars were a reminder of where it all began. The night was cold, but their hearts were warm, and as they held each other, they knew they'd found their home, not just in Aspen, but in each other.